joined today by Nick Ciesielski, Libertarian for Pennsylvania Treasurer. Tell us, why are you seeking this office?
Well, that's a pretty simple question, I think. Really, it's the office of treasurer for me because I've been quite concerned about what I've seen economically happening in our country over the past several years, since I really kind of started diving into this. And I believe we need some accountability and a independent third voice to kind of check the spending habits and check the the political whims that seem to come out of Harrisburg and other places across the state.
What experience would you bring to the office of treasurer?
So I am not in any sort of financial position, in any sort of financial job. I'm an engineer. The most I have is I took a bunch of business classes. I had a minor in business while getting my degree in mechanical engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. So I've got, a little bit of a base, but took some I took at least one economics class, but really it's been kind of my self-education after having graduated and personal interests diving into more economic subjects. This was in my discovery of libertarianism and the philosophy behind it, kind of understanding Austrian school economics, which goes hand in hand with it, and kind of looking through those resources by some of the great writers and listening to some of the great economists out there on these subjects to really understand what's going on in our economy and why we're always seeming like people can't get ahead. We've got, rampant inflation. We had rampant inflation coming out of COVID. Housing prices going up, the housing crisis of 2008. And it's, and if you look at it and kind of understand the broad perspective on this and how everything is kind of interconnected on that, it's not a random event. It's not something that just happens. I mean, these are kind of features of the system that we currently live under. And part of what I want to do is, part of running this campaign in my messaging is to bring awareness to this and say, hey, there are better ways. There are ways that are, you can expect the consequences. You can see where things are going. And I think there are ways not only to roll it back and prevent it, maybe prevent some of these bad side effects through an office like treasurer, even though a lot of it would also come from being, legislature and things like that. But I believe being that check as the treasurer and having the power of the purse there to kind of hold that back allows that check and so that's why I decided to run for treasurer.
For those not familiar, can you explain some of the most significant roles the state treasurer plays?
Yeah, so the state treasurer, I think largely some of the biggest roles, in my opinion, are managing the state debt, and also issuing state debt bonds, things like that. Additionally, there's managing the state pension funds and also managing unclaimed property.
What would be your top priorities if elected to this office?
Yeah, so I think my top priorities, I kind of spelled out there a little bit, is to be that independent check on the Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, in the governor's mansion, who can spend money, however they want. I mean, there are somewhat limitations to it, more so than, say, the federal government that kind of can spend and spend and spend and print what they want. But I was looking at the transparency portal on the state treasurer website, and we, right now they're saying we're at just state debt is $4,000 per capita so $4,000 of debt per person on the state, in state debt. And I think that's unacceptable. I think we need to be living within our means. And I think one of the big things is preventing any further debt, refusing to issue debt, telling the legislature you have to come up with your budgets, you have to spend within reason, and you can't just be stealing money from everyone out there. Not only through taxation, which is a libertarian position that we see taxation as as forceful taking of our earnings, but also through this debt tax, where if we're not going to have to pay for it, our future generations will have to pay for it. So I think that's one of the big things on my end. I think some of the other things, like I've said, money's a big issue to me, and promotion of alternatives, whether that be gold, Bitcoin is a big thing for me. And one of the big things I want to focus on is, so part of this would also include holding Bitcoin in the state treasury, in the state pension funds, because I believe that the way, that when we come up against the cliff as far as pensions, as Pennsylvanians get older and we're not necessarily, and that funds aren't coming in to cover all that in the, I believe the state pension funds are at about 65% funded right now. You're going to need some asset in there that's going to outperform. Otherwise you're going to start telling everyone, hey, we don't have the money, or it's going to fall on the taxpayer to cover these shortfalls.
You mentioned being unsatisfied with the level of inflation nationally, but Pennsylvania is one of 50 states. So how would you, as treasurer, help Pennsylvania lead the charge to diminish the amount of inflation nationally?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this comes from education on this, right? So, and understanding the mechanisms by which inflation happens. The definition of inflation that we're all told is an increase of prices. But having, like I said, studying economics on my own, coming from Austrian school economics, the definition of inflation I like to use, and that's used more there, is that inflation is an increase in the money supply. So as more money gets printed and circulates in, that's more dollars chasing the same amount of goods. So as you're chasing the same amount of goods with more money, prices have to go up. That's simple supply and demand. So, when you see, I think the big thing of this, and I called it at the time as soon as it started. But during COVID, when the federal government printed $6 billion in 2020, and I think about 300 billion of that was, the so-called stimmy checks sent out to everyone. But that's a big difference there, right? That's still $5.3 trillion that went elsewhere to corporations, politically connected entities, wherever. I mean, it went all over the place. And I think, and I'm kind of taking this from a video I was watching from a Bitcoin influencer named Guy Swan, who really made this point succinctly. But to really understand what $6 trillion is kind of interesting to me, right? So if you look at the average American would earn $2 million over their lifetime, and that's, and so $2 million is what, every decision they're going to make in the market amounts to, all the blood, sweat, and tears, houses, every expense, all the stress economically. And so that $6 trillion is the lifetime earning of 3 million Americans. That's 1%, that's about 1% of Americans. And that's just money printed out there. And it's thrown out there into the wild. It goes here, it goes there. Politically favored entities, banks, wherever they believe they need this money to go. And so all this market power you have from 3 million Americans gets offset immediately by, here's all this money. And so we look at, all the problems we're having in the world today, everyone's at each other's throats, everything's become political. And it's kind of like, no wonder we're kind of in this situation, everyone feels the way that they feel, that prices are going up, you can't get ahead. All these things just kind of, you see issues with homelessness rising. You see issues with drug use. All this fentanyl on the streets, and it's like, well, no wonder people are. We have mental health crisis. No wonder all this, because in 1 year we just printed out, $3 million, 3 million people's worth of lifetime economic output, and then to further on from that, that was just 1 year. At the end of 2019, the national debt was $22.7 trillion. And now in 5 years later, we're over $35 trillion. So that's another, $6 trillion or so. Total of 12 or 13 trillion over 5 years. And that money gets printed, that money, I'm saying printed, and there's more complex, but simply enough, that's how I'm going to state it on here. But you've got you've got this extra 12 to 13 trillion dollars out there now. It's send money to Ukraine, send money here, send money there, all this money going everywhere. And it's like, it's like, for the average person, you feel left behind. So the fact that all this extra money is now out there, it's no wonder why prices are rising, why people, why it seems like you can't get ahead. And you start hearing, solutions like, oh, we're going to give $25,000 to the first time home buyer. But all that's going to do is raise first time home buyer prices by $25,000. It's very simple on that. I think the big thing is you've got the government, at all levels, but I'm focusing federally on this because that's where we're seeing all these issues. Well, a lot of these issues start, but you've got the. I'm sorry, I lost my spot on this.
Okay, before we get too far, let's talk about you. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was raised in Lower Borough, Pennsylvania, so that's just north of Pittsburgh.
And then you mentioned going to Carnegie Mellon to get a degree in some kind of engineering. Is that what you do for a living?
Yes, I'm a mechanical engineer.
So what drew you exactly to public service?
Well, like I said, it's seeing all these problems out there and at least being able to, I might not have all the solutions, but I'm not pretending to have the solutions on this. I'm trying to point out, where I see things and potential solutions I think that would work out for the benefit of everyone.
You are running as a Libertarian. What is the platform of the Libertarian Party?
Simply put, it's don't hurt people and don't take their stuff.
What drew you exactly to the party?
Yeah, so in a weird roundabout way, I kind of started getting in. I got introduced to some influencers in the libertarian space. Some podcasts, some things like that, around 2016. And so I spent 2016 to 2021 kind of just in this hobby of libertarian philosophy. And it was kind of 2021 where I was unhappy with what I saw resulting from COVID and saw a good group of people coming up in the Libertarian Party. I said, all right, yeah, these guys I agree with. These guys are my people. They're listening to the same people. They see eye to eye on me. And I said, all right, let's take the leap on this. And I never really expected, at least, not this quickly, to be making a run for statewide office. Part of, the strategy that I came in under that we were pushing is to run local and make change locally. But, statewide year, and someone had to step up. So
Now to focus on some policy issues, your website has many references, and you even referenced it earlier in this interview, to Bitcoin. For those who may not be familiar, can you explain what Bitcoin is?
yeah, simply put, we could call it magic internet money, but really it's to explain it, it's basically a record of all transactions, right? So it's a ledger that basically says this amount went from here to this person there, simply put, right? And to do that, what it takes is a whole bunch of specialized computers guessing at a number. So that's expending energy. And when they find that number, they complete the transactions. And then those are one by one stacked behind each other in a continuous chain, so that earlier transactions can't be changed unless you come up with some absurd amount of computing power that can't exist. I mean, unless you get potentially quantum, but that's even, getting into the weeds on it. But basically what it is rather than relying on, on the US dollar, rather than having, say, a US dollar where you're at the mercy of the Federal Reserve and political whims, it's a decentralized system. So anyone can hop on there. They can, you can run your own copy of every transaction. I've got a computer that does that. It fits on a small hard drive. That's a big factor with Bitcoin, is that transactions need to be small, which causes issues with scaling the network overall. But really, the overall record of all transactions is small. That way, as many people as possible can keep copies of it. And then everyone's copy has to say, hey, we all agree this is the current state of things. And that kind of lets everyone know who's got what. So it's a system where you don't need banks to settle transactions. You don't need permission from anyone to settle transactions. It's a complete separation of money and the government, which, like I've talked about, there's all the manipulation that comes in, all the spending, the printing of money. Having a system like Bitcoin where only 21 million will ever be issued, and now we can, there's 100 million Satoshis, as we call them, per Bitcoin. So there's still a ton of parts to it, but only 21 million Bitcoin themselves will ever be issued. So you don't have this rampant inflation issue. You've just got, hey, here's what the supply is going to be. They issue at a set rate right now for the next 100 or so years, set rate that cuts in half every 4 years. And this kind of allows us to escape from these overbearing government controls. I mean, what we saw, let's take the trucker strike in Canada, where, the Trudeau government was unhappy with donations coming in to fund these protesters, saying, hey, we're upset with what you're doing here. We want to work. We don't want to, we're sick of everything going on. So we're going to park our trucks here. We need funding. Well, they shut down bank accounts. They shut down donation sites. But the one thing they couldn't shut down was just sending Bitcoin to everyone. And so that was a way that, you can get around tyrannical actions peacefully.
Your website also mentions wanting to energize Pennsylvania with both natural and alternative energy. How would a treasurer do that? And if you use Bitcoin in your role, how will you manage the energy, since it does take a lot of computers?
Okay, this is where it gets really fun, right? So from a treasurer role itself, I'm not exactly, there's probably not too much interface as far as policy I can make to promote energy usage, but really I just want to be an advocate of energy use. I believe, I've kind of called it a formula for prosperity. And so societies producing more energy have more, are prosperous. You cut the energy use, you're losing that. So what we get with Bitcoin mining, Well, yeah, what we get with Bitcoin is that you've got Bitcoin miners that do take a lot of computing power, as you said. But really, what we've seen is that you can use these miners. Well, they're going to go to wherever power is cheapest. So there's. I'm trying to let me think of a way I want to take this real quick on it. So what we see in Texas is doing this a lot, but basically you're overproducing. You're overproducing power or producing at whatever rates, especially when you've got solar or wind power that is intermittent. You can't really control on that, but the grid might not need all that energy. So you've got Bitcoin miners come in, they're making a profit off of it. You're able to profitably charge for the electricity as the energy companies. And then there's deals in place that whenever power is needed, the mining goes down. They shut the miners off, and now all that power flows to the grid to make up for shortfalls on the grid. You can see that you could do the same thing, say, with nuclear, because we go through an energy cycle every day. In the evening you kind of get peaks, and so right now you've got to turn on, say, natural gas fired power, peaker plants, things like that, in order to make up and ensure that there's enough energy being delivered to the grid. But if you had something efficient like a nuclear reactor, which would normally provide that base load, you could raise that by having a ton of mining, eat up all that electricity, and then just shut down when it's not needed. So it's done that in areas where transmission cables haven't been brought to the grid. Well, transmission cables, transmission capacity hasn't been brought from alternative sources to the grid in sufficient amounts. It eats that up, allowing profits to be made by the energy producers there while waiting to get the rest of the grid connectivity. And I think one thing we have a lot of that I'm seeing is the state capping abandoned gas wells. And that's energy sitting out there. And, we'd of course don't want to be leaking natural gas off into the atmosphere. That's a waste. It's not good. You get that in, one thing in my background is I did spend some time in Midland, Texas, the kind of the heart of the American oil industry. And one thing you saw down there from all the oil production is a lot of natural gas that didn't have pipelines to make it to elsewhere because it just wasn't cost effective. And so they would burn that off. They would just burn it. There were flares around town. Like, it was just a normal part of life there. What a bunch of mining companies did was say, "Hey, this is power. We go in, we hook up to their gas flare. Instead of burning that, we're running it through a generator. And then instead of just either burning off natural gas, at least we're doing something. We're harnessing that energy." And with all these abandoned gas wells that we're capping, there's the ability there for someone to come in, and rather than the state paying for it, we just say, "Hey, these are open, go figure out the production. And if you can produce off of it, why don't you go produce off of it rather than this being something that costs taxpayers money?"
If elected, how would you prioritize where you make investments?
Yeah. So I think the big thing is trying to remain fairly politically neutral in investments, right? You want to get the right return. You don't want to, I don't want to be someone out there using these investments to make some sort of social change. You want to really just focus in on where, I guess, simple investments, things that are going to be generally predictable. But like I said, also, my background with Bitcoin here, I think that a good state treasury asset would be having a sufficient amount of Bitcoin that over time will grow in significant value, in my opinion, and allow us hopefully maybe take away some of the tax burden, make up a kind of reduce costs on Pennsylvanians in the long run.
Take the last few minutes to tell the voters of Pennsylvania why they should vote you for treasurer.
Yes. So So like I said, I'm about accountability and being that independent third voice here. I'm looking for alternative solutions to better to get Pennsylvania on a better, more financial footprint. Looking for ways that rather than relying on the government to do something, to allow the incentives to happen, that competition in the market can come in and help provide us with more prosperity. So, like I've said on my website there, privatize, energize, monetize is my formula for prosperity, and that's what I've kind of been laying out here, right? Instead of the state capping, instead of the state paying to cap gas wells, let's let industry come in and put that to good use. Let's get the government out of our lives as much as possible, out of our money as much as possible. Let's, energize and cover that. Let's make sure that we have good energy. I don't want to be like us, out in California where you see them putting energy limits and then telling everyone get electric cars while having rolling brownouts. I don't think that's good for anyone. I don't think that's a sign of prosperity. And then monetize. I want to monetize alternative assets from the U.S. dollar. So that means, promoting the use of Bitcoin, promoting the use of gold. Other states have, gold depositories that allow you to deposit gold with them, buy gold from them, and then spend it on like a debit card where it's deducting from that. I think all of these solutions, whatever really the market wants on this, to help, to grow and maintain and preserve the wealth of Pennsylvanians is the solution here. And that's what I'm about. And that's why I believe you should vote for me this November.
Nick Ciesielski, Libertarian for Treasurer, thank you for your time.
Thank you.